I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Let's welcome Dr. Marc Bradley.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Can y'all hear me okay? Yes. Better with the mic than without the mic?
Yeah.
All right, good deal.
Just go on.
I like to talk with my hands sometimes, so I may move it around.
Oh yeah, he was in the Marines for what, 11 years?
I was in the Marines for 5. I traveled all across the country.
Yeah, and he traveled all over the Mideast and Europe for what, 11 years? or so?
Yeah, I've lived overseas, lots of different places. I lived across the Middle East, and then spent a lot of time living with the Bedouins in tents across the Middle East. So my mom always said I was cultured. I'm not sure she'd always agree with that now, but it sounded good at the time. I am the director of Creation Kingdom Zoo. I've been there for, the zoo's been around for 8 years. We're starting our 9th year in September. But our conservation center has been around for 22 years, 23 this summer. We did a lot of conservation work privately for years. Breeding different animals, involved in some international programs around the world, mostly with the West African Primate Conservation Center and that sort of thing. So I can give you guys a little bit of history about the zoo. I understand you guys are history buffs, all right? Our history doesn't go quite back as long as far back as some other things do, but we all got to start somewhere. And I believe it was Martin Luther King that said that we are not makers of history, but we're made by history. So, and I believe that we're all shaped by the things that have occurred long before us. So, we'll see if we can get this equipment here to work. The motto for Creation Kingdom Zoo is making a difference. I believe that everything we do, we need to make a difference in what we're doing. Whether we're a school teacher, a zookeeper, a ditch digger, whatever that may be, I believe we can make a difference in the world that we live in. So. I believe in putting our money where our mouth is, and that's where we came up with that motto. Are we working there? There we go. A little bit of history about the zoo. It was built on my great-great-grandparents' old property. They had a farm there in Snowflake, Virginia, originally 500 acres. They raised grain, sheep, and then they had some draft horses as well. So the wildlife on the property has changed some over the last 150 years. But that's where it all kind of started. My great-great-grandfather was a stonemason. So he cut a lot of stones to put for the foundations of houses and barns. And the original house is still there on the property as well as the barn. Both of those have had a lot of work done to them over the years. And the house itself was originally a log house. It was then had some siding, wood siding put on it over the years, and then eventually some other siding after that. The barn itself, we laugh, that's one of the places where it's close to the entrance to the zoo. It would have been easier, I think, to have burnt the barn to the ground and started over. If any of you have done any remodeling on old buildings, nothing was square, nothing was plumb, and it takes twice as long to do anything. But it had sentimental value to us. It still has the wormy chestnut on 3 of the sides of the barn. And we wanted to keep that barn intact for as long as we could. It was used originally, again, for some sheep and grains, and then later used as a tobacco barn. We've been involved in conservation programs since the mid-90s. In the mid-90s, I started working with a couple of South American programs, doing some conservation work with them, and had the fortune to meet and work with, many of you know Jim Fowler. You guys remember Jim Fowler, Mutual of Omaha's Wild Kingdom, Marlon Perkins. Marlon's no longer with us, but Jim's still around. But I met Jim. Jim kind of got us with our foot in the door with a lot of different things, along with Jurgen Schultz, Carl Mogensen. Those were guys that brought animals into zoos originally years ago, or wrangling them in different areas of the world. So we had the opportunity to meet with them, work with them, and that kind of got our foot in the door. And then I started looking at field research that they had in the 1970s. And it's funny how if we look back in history, things that we learn, a lot of times we just sort of erase that and we move on to what we consider to be bigger and better things, which is not always the case. And they've done field research on different types of animals, mostly mammals around the world. And I tried to apply that to captive management programs of animals because field research is obviously working with these animals that are in their native land, working in the wild. And when we move them into a captive environment, things kind of shift a little bit, they kind of change. And we wanted to go back to those original ideas that they came up with in the 70s. We kind of erased those. You know, zoological parks went a different direction. When around the 80s and 90s, we started going to a different model for what zoos were. But really what they had discovered in the 70s in field research is what works best for animals. And I'll discuss that here in just a few minutes. We opened a conservation facility to the public in 2009, the summer of 2009. We decided that we were doing some good things with conservation programs. We had great breeding programs, and all that was great. But I work with a lot of zoos around the country, and what I was noticing was that zoos weren't really teaching folks much. It was an entertainment venue, you know. How many of you go to zoos? You've been to zoos? Most everybody's been to a zoo, right? It became an entertainment venue because you would come to the zoo, you'd see an animal, he was doing whatever, maybe asleep, maybe you didn't see him. You know, it was always a joke. You go to a zoo, you see a sign, you don't see an animal, they don't really have it, right? You put a sign up, it's cheaper to keep. But you'd go to the zoo, but you'd never really learn anything. You know, and I've been to San Diego Zoo, I've been to lots of different zoos. You know, San Diego's considered the pinnacle of zoos for the United States. But I went to all these different places, and I was behind the scenes and working at some of these places or working with some of them. And what I found was I couldn't find people to engage with. I'd go and I would go to an exhibit and I might or might not see the animal, it might or might not be acting naturally, but I couldn't ask questions about it. Now there's plenty of signage around, but there wasn't any way for me to find out more. And so that's when we decided we wanted to open our facility to the public, because I wanted to teach people. How many of you have been to Africa? A few of you, all right? South America? A few of you, all right? I got some travelers here, that's what I like. Lots of you have been lots of different places, but the reality is most folks don't have that opportunity to travel. Most folks are never going to see an African elephant in the bush. They're never going to see a howler monkey close to the riverbanks in South and Central America. They're just not going to have that opportunity. That's where zoos come in. It gives folks an opportunity to see something they'd otherwise never see. Otherwise, they're only going to see it on Nat Geo on TV or something like that, which is great, but not the same thing. Our conservation work and breeding programs began originally there at the farm for about 15 years, I guess, before we originally opened. They started there, and we've continued to do that after the zoo opened. It opened officially in 2009, September. Had a quick season. We're only open mid-March through November 30th, so we had a quick season that first year, but that gave us a little bit of time to put some things back together. In a nutshell, here's kind of what happened. I took our passion for the planet's animals that we have, and I wanted to put that to work. Because again, my motto was making a difference. We have a lot of armchair activists in the world. Listen, we can all sit back in our lazy boys and we can fuss about things, whether it's politics or animals, right? We can fuss about it. Americans are great at that. We can sit, we can fuss, and we can make ourselves feel good and throw a little money here and there. But in reality, we're armchair activists. We're not really making a difference. And I believe we need to put our money where our mouth is. We're going to all leave something behind when we take that last breath. And what we leave behind is what really matters. Whether it's great or small, whatever those accomplishments are, eventually they're going to fade. They're going to go away. They'll be forgotten. But I wanted to leave a spark that ignites a flame with somebody else. I want to make a difference for that child, that adult that comes to the zoo. You're only going to reach a few people in life. You know, I mean, the reality is very few of us are Billy Graham. We're not going to touch that many lives. But it's a percentage that you touch, you know. If one child can come out of the zoo and be a great conservationist, you know, we've made a difference. Because one person can make a difference. So therein lies a legacy. You know, I want you guys to think about that, is what embers are you going to ignite when you're going? All right, we're coming up here. 52% of the Earth's animals have gone extinct since 1973. That was the year I was born. I know, I look much younger, but I was born in 1973. 52% of the Earth's animals. In the last 100 years, over 500 animals have gone extinct. That's unfathomable. You know, we have progressed so far in so many areas, and yet in the name of that progression, I think we have not been great stewards of the planet that we live in. Less than 1% of the animals on the endangered species list have ever been taken off. Now, 1973 was when the endangered species list was brought about by Congress. 1974 it went into effect. So in that many years, we've had less than 1% of animals taken off that list. What does that tell you guys? It's not working, right? Yeah. I mean, the Endangered Species Act was supposed to save animals, and it's not doing the best job in the world. Not your ordinary zoo. Now, when I looked at these models in the 1970s, it was a little bit odd. You know, when we go to zoos, we tend to have a little paved sidewalk, and there's 5 pansies planted here, and a couple of ferns, and then a little animal right here, right? And that's kind of the model that we've gone for zoos. But in the 1970s, they had a discussion, a book called Mammals in Captivity, and it discussed having natural exhibits everywhere. So you would have natural plants and vegetation inside the exhibit as well as outside the exhibit, and it would kind of blur the line between the fences there. It would immerse the visitor in the animal's world, and visitors would speak in hushed voices. And we went away from that, you know, because the reality is most of your zoos are tax funded, all right, by the taxpayers. The city owns that zoo. And so the bottom line is what's going to bring in money to pay for the thing that we've put out there. And so as a privately owned facility, I receive no tax dollars or anything like that. So I can kind of make my own rules. If it's not a popular animal, I don't have to get rid of it, right? And that happens. The reality is it doesn't matter how endangered it is. If the public doesn't like an animal at a zoo, don't pay a whole lot of attention to it, the zoo will get rid of it. Well, that's not how we operate. So I wanted to kind of turn that idea of a zoo upside down on its head and keep a natural area inside and outside the exhibits there. So you won't find any pavement, any concrete inside the zoo. Now, is that inconvenient for some visitors? Sure, absolutely it is. If you go to the Duke Lemur Conservation Center outside of Raleigh there, #1 conservation facility for all 119 species of lemurs in the world, own more lemurs than anywhere else in the world, there's no pavement inside there, right? Because what I wanted to do is I wanted to make it comfortable for the animals, all right? Does that make it inconvenient sometimes for visitors? Absolutely. But the reality is, I'm not in the business of reproducing humans. I'm in the business, we do pretty good at that, right? I'm in the business of reproducing some of the world's rarest animals in the world. So there's a fine line there. Animal enrichment that mimics natural behaviors. How many of you have been to a zoo somewhere and animals are acting all crazy? You know, acting not like you probably should act. A lot of times it's stereotypical behavior. You know, it's just a stressed behavior that an animal has just because it's not really like in its environment, right? So we wanted to get rid of those type of behaviors. I want a visitor when they come to the zoo to see an animal engaged in natural behavior, what it would be doing in the wild. And the reality is sometimes it's real boring. You know, I mean, what, you all have, anybody have house cats?
Cats.
No, okay, all right. Y'all afraid to admit you got cats or what? What's your house cat do all day?
Sleeps.
Sleeps, absolutely. You know what tigers do all day? Sleep, right? They get up, all right, and they'll roam about 70 miles because the tiger is starving. He has a 20% success rate with his kills, right? The reality of the wild is they're not very good hunters. So they roam over a large range. But they did studies with tigers in the wild and found that if a tiger had ample food, ample shelter, and was safe from predation, mainly humans, right? The tiger wasn't going to leave a 3/4 to a 1 acre area. He's just going to lay around. He's just going to find a new spot to sleep, right? So in the wild, they're doing some things sometimes because it's not as convenient for them as it is in captivity. Visitor interaction with animals and staff. If I can get visitors to interact with an animal, you're going to start caring about that animal. No, not everybody. Everybody's not an animal person. We get people at the zoo all the time. They're not animal people. They're funny. They're fun for the keepers to mess with, you know. They're always, they see a keeper coming, they're always going, they want to be asked questions, right? I sit and I laugh, you know, what did they come to the zoo for? But the reality is, if you can interact with an animal by feeding it, that's the main way that we can get visitors to interact. You can buy food at Creation Kingdom Zoo to feed monkeys, lemurs, and then all different kinds of hoof stock. But if you're feeding a lemur, right, all of a sudden you're engaging with that animal. If you're engaging with it, you start to kind of care about it. You form a little bit of a bond. Maybe not this trip, but the next trip you come back. Your kids or your grandkids now start to name that animal, right? Bobo, Bendy, whatever, all kinds of crazy names, but that's what they're gonna name that lemur, because now they formed a bond with it. They see mama with a baby on it, you know? They go to the gift shop and they buy a mama and a baby. The parents hate that. When you sell the combo, right, of mom and baby, now they gotta buy two, right? But what happens is, eventually that kid starts asking questions about Madagascar. The adults will ask questions about Madagascar, deforestation, why are all lemurs endangered? Why are they all on the island of Madagascar naturally and nowhere else? That's learning, and that's how you get people engaged with animals in conservation. The national average time at an exhibit in the world is 18 seconds. Seems like not a whole lot of time. Think about the last time you were at the zoo. You walk up, and then you go on to the next one. You know, about 18 seconds at an exhibit. Creation Kingdom Zoo's got an average of 2 minutes. Now that's not a tremendous amount of time, but that's a tremendous jump from 18 seconds. And the reason for that is they're engaged with the animal. And if you can engage with that animal, now you're spending 2 minutes at an exhibit, you're going to learn a whole lot more about it. Every species at Creation Kingdom Zoo reproduces. That was the goal. Listen, if it's not breeding, we're doing something wrong, or we've got an animal that needs some help, or maybe some things just don't breed. We're one of only 5 private zoos in the United States that's an SSP participant. SSP stands for Species Survival Program. All of your big metropolitan city-owned zoos, Knoxville Zoo, Cincinnati Zoo, San Diego Zoo, those are all participants in what's called an SSP, a Species Survival Program. What that program is it's a stud book, essentially, of every animal of that particular species. They're all labeled. They've all got ID tags, usually underneath the skin. But it is a program that is ensuring genetic diversity through this breeding. You see, anybody can breed 2 animals together sometimes. I say anybody, you know, sometimes you can breed them. But if we continue to breed brother and sister, things aren't going to pan out real well. Long term, those animals are not going to survive. And so what the AZA zoos did was they put together a species survival program where we could track these animals. And every year, recommendations are made for breeding between different animals. There are only 5 private zoos in the country. We're a proud participant with that. We have a lot of animals loaned to a lot of zoos, and everything there reproduces. So it's a neat thing for us. Natural exhibits. There's a picture. It looks like a red ruff lemur exhibit. These exhibits are built naturally with the vegetation inside and out. What I found was, years ago, zoos decided they wanted to get rid of wire. Of course, they use steel bars a lot of times. They look like they were in prison. But they didn't want to use that wire. What they wanted to do was, they didn't have cameras at that time that would focus through the wire. And so they said, let's get rid of the wire, let's go to a moat system so an animal can't cross that large body of water, and now a visitor's not looking through the wire. Well, the problem with that is, how many times have you had to put a quarter in that little machine to find where the animal was? It's just so far away, right? We went back to that old fence system. I have found that people don't mind to look through wire. You came to a zoo to look at animals, not to put a quarter in a machine and see if you could find it. You know, you can sit at home in the luxury of your couch and get up close and personal. Better than you can at some of these zoos. And so we went back to a fence system using mostly black wire. The eye tends to focus through black a whole lot easier. And what we found was, visitors are 8 feet away from a 600-pound tiger. That's pretty cool. Most folks didn't know how big a tiger was. They didn't realize that zebras are not really that big. It's a 500-pound animal. They're thinking from Nat Geo, because they didn't have anything to gauge it with, that zebras were huge. So people are learning there. You blur the fence barriers and visitors want to speak in hushed voices. Now I say that depends on what time of year, right? In the spring of the year, you get 75 days straight of field trips. There are no hushed voices first thing in the morning. 200 middle school kids inside the zoo, it is not quiet. But the reality is, most of the time, people are going to speak in a little bit hushed voices. We have bamboo tunnels, all right, to simulate some natural places you go through in the wild. Nice shady spots to go through, but it's interesting to watch visitors. They can be talking quite loud in the public, or in the open there, and then they come through the bamboo tunnel and they start talking a little quieter, because they're not sure what's around the next bend, And it's kind of neat to watch that. There's a spotted hyena there, one of the hyena girls there at the zoo. Animal enrichment. It's funny, enrichment is things that engage an animal mentally, okay? And so, at the zoo we have opportunities for the public feedings, which encourages that natural behavior. The funny thing is, and there's some signs up that explain this, but visitors can buy, they buy little cups of fruit, right, to feed the primates. So you're not feeding them out of your hands. You just toss some little pieces to them, because they're only 6 to 8 feet away. And there's different sized wires and all that, but there's a lot goes into feeding these animals. And the interesting thing is, primates spend about 85% of their day digging around for food. They look all day for food. And what seems very tedious for us, and we're like, for the love of humanity, just put it in a bowl. That's not how these guys work. They're searching through blades of grass. 85% of the day spent foraging for food. Well, when their visitors are tossing little treats to these guys, some goes inside the exhibit area, some lands outside. Sometimes the monkey looks at it and he says, see who's coming behind you. The beauty of captivity is you can be picky. But at the end of the day, they get this fruit scattered out, maybe in front of the exhibits, sometimes inside the exhibits, because they said, now I don't want that carrot, I'm waiting on a grape over here. But towards the end of the day, you'll see them on the ground. And they're picking through every blade of grass to pick up. The ones that have a little more intelligence than some of the others have sticks inside their cages, little pieces of bamboo sticks. And they'll take those sticks and they'll reach outside. And they'll work and work to get that grape in. Right? And for us, again, we're sitting there going, just kick it over to them, give it to them. But it's good mental stimulation for them. You see, the monkeys aren't acting all crazy. They're not reproducing because they're bored in captivity. It's an environment that stimulates their natural environment. The natural environment around the zoo, you know, I hear lots of times, I had a friend of mine built a $40 million pachyderm exhibit. Elephant exhibit, $40 million. I laugh because I can do a lot with $40 million. But the reality is the animal doesn't give a rip about that exhibit. The Taj Mahal building they built that the elephant gets to go in, is that he doesn't care. Let me tell you what an elephant wants, and studies will show it. He wants a tree to throw around and a mud hole to wallow in. He doesn't care. All he wants to do is get some mud and spray all over the side of that pretty white building that they just built him. But the thing is, that exhibit might be natural right here where the elephant is, but just 100 yards this direction is a 4-lane. You know, a football field's distance away over here, you've got the busy city traffic. So it's not a natural environment. If any of you have been to Grecian Kingdom Zoo, some folks are afraid they'll hear banjos start playing as they turn up the road. I mean, it's in the middle of nowhere. But it was there for a reason. We own most of the property all the way around the zoo so that it can stay natural outside the zoo as well. You know, you can sit inside the zoo and hear nature around you, which is not only calming for you, but it's calming for the residents there inside the zoo. We have the keeper feeding methods. Keepers are feeding different ways in order to stimulate those natural behaviors for the animals there. Start dancing here in a minute. You wouldn't want me to dance, I'll tell you. Let's see, visitor interaction, up close and personal. Again, we talked about the tigers being 8 feet away from you. A lot of folks see tigers from about 60 to 80 feet away. You know, a 600-pound cat's a big cat. He got big feet, you know, feet as big as my head. This is a picture of me with a young giraffe, Tucker there, but that's not what visitors get to do. But the beauty of working in a zoo is sometimes we get that. But as we mentioned a little while ago, when you interact with animals, it fosters a care for those animals. And when you start to care about them, now you start to want to look up stuff and learn about them. A caring attitude is going to make a huge difference in conservation long term. My goal is to, with that Endangered Species Act, we need to get more animals off of there. Now, the Zoological Conservation and Research of Endangered Wildlife, it's also called Zoo Crew. We restructured in January of this year our original conservation program that we had going on. We restructured that into a 501c3 corporation for a couple different reasons. I had always steered clear of nonprofit organizations because I honestly just didn't know a whole lot about them. And but we wanted to make a bigger imprint, a bigger footprint. I've got to make a bigger difference. And so in order to get more people involved, we turned that conservation, we kind of restructured that program that we had, Zoo Crew, into a nonprofit organization. And the conservation there at the zoo really has been pretty cool. It's funny, folks have heard about the zoo for years. They saw pictures of animals that we had, maybe having babies, but long before the zoo was even open. They'd see it on TV, but they never associated it with the zoo. Because the reality is you're not looking to see where it is, you're just looking to see what it is. It's a cute baby, right? So it's funny, the number of times that we've been in the media over the last 20 years and folks didn't realize it was in their own backyard. Education and propagation is a huge part of zoo conservation. Because without those two, if we're just got a zoo and we're not educating people and we're not breeding the animals that are in those captive environments. We are merely an entertainment venue. No different than going to a Las Vegas show. Nothing wrong with that, but you're not meeting the goals that we need to have. And that was one of the problems that we had with a lot of the zoos nationally and internationally, was just that lack of education. One of the things I tell our keepers there all the time is, listen, I know you got a lot of work to do. You're professional poop scoopers, you're cleaning, feeding, cutting up food, but you've got to engage with our visitors. If a visitor leaves Creation Kingdom Zoo and they haven't learned something, we have not done our job. And that's a reality. We have staff meetings every single week to remind those guys that, listen, somebody's got to learn something. Give them a fact, engage in conversation. And some people don't want to learn. Those are people who we don't know really why they're there anyway. But they just, they don't want to learn anything. But most folks want to learn something while they're there. I'll give you a few things that the zoo has done successfully over the last few years. White-capped mangabeys, one of the primates there at the zoo. We have the largest breeding group in the United States, and we were the first zoo in the state of Virginia to reproduce those. Years ago, white-capped mangabey was considered by your large AZA zoos as a just an old gray monkey, is what they called it, and the visitors didn't like it. So years ago, I bought those old gray monkeys because they were in the top 5 most endangered primates on the planet. I was frustrated because our large metropolitan zoos, just because visitors didn't like it, we're just going to get rid of it. Oh, visitors don't like it, who cares if it's going to go extinct? That's not how I operate. My mind just doesn't work that way. So I bought a group of white-capped mangabeys. We brought them in and started reproducing those guys. And they're tough to reproduce. All right? Sometimes you might have a male and a female. It doesn't always work out well. Sometimes, and mangabeys have a problem with their firstborns. The word mangabey means one with a small waist in Swahili, and they have a small pelvic outlet. So usually your firstborn babies are stillborns. But the zoo worked hard to get those guys reproducing. We now own the largest breeding group in the country. Red ruffed lemurs, black and white ruffed lemurs. That's a black and white ruffed lemur there in the picture. We have incredible breeding programs with those guys. They got about an 85% mortality rate with the babies. Most of those babies die. We've got a 96% success rate with the babies. There's a lot of work goes into those guys, making sure that they fall most of the time. These guys are found about 120 feet up in the trees. Babies don't have a grasping reflex. They can't hang on to mama. So she napes them by the neck and carries them to about 10 different nests throughout the day. The babies fall. That's how they end up dying. Alba franz lemurs, we also, great success with those, just had a baby born a week ago. Sloth bears are another one of our project animals. A good friend of mine by the name of Kurt Krebs. Anybody know Kurt? Probably not, just in case. Kurt is a leader in ursid or bear species conservation. At one time he owned 1/3 of all Asiatic bear species in the country, loaned a lot of those animals out. As he got older, I had been wanting to buy some sloth bears from him for years because it's the rarest bear in the world. And he just wouldn't sell. He said, I just don't want to get rid of it. He got older and it was harder to take care of. He called me up one day, he said, you want some bears? I said, yes. We bought some sloth bears. But there are 5 times as many pandas as there are sloth bears. Yeah, pandas are where all the research money goes. People throw tons of money at pandas. How many of you know that no one owns a panda in the world except the country of China? $1 million a year, that's what you lease them for. Think about that next time you're at Zoo Atlanta. How many millions of dollars are going to the country of China for a bear? Not saying those guys didn't need help, but there are 33 individual bears in the United States across 13 institutions. Creation Kingdom Zoo is the only private zoo that owns them, and we are the largest, have the largest reproductive program for those. Of those 33 bears, 11 of those are ours across the zoos that we've got on loan at different places. But the sloth bears were one of those bears that nobody cared about. It's just an old dirty bear is what they call it. But the funny thing about sloth bears is they're insectivores. They eat 300,000 to 500,000 termites a day apiece. Terminex needs to hire these guys. These bears are really neat, but the funny thing about sloth bears is because they're termite and insect eaters, they spend their whole day just digging, just making a mess. And so zoos didn't want to keep them. They're like, nah, this bear is just going to make a mess of that exhibit. San Diego Zoo built a $1.5 million tree that was really cool for their sloth bear exhibit several years ago. It had little elevator doors in it. The bear could pull out treats. $1.5 million, it was destroyed that afternoon. They restored all pieces. That's why nobody likes sloth bears. They cost you a lot in maintenance. But interesting about sloth bears is zoos started keeping them on what's called gunite. It's a concrete, it's painted to look like rocks or trees or whatever. It looks beautiful. But the funny thing was, when they put the sloth bears on the gunite, they stopped reproducing. But they look good. They're real clean. The exhibit looked great. When we brought sloth bears in, I put them on, we dug out a huge hole and we put wire, kind of like a swimming pool underneath, so that the bears couldn't dig out, filled it back up. It's got a skirt around the outside, but we put them on dirt. And the bears had a heyday. I mean, it looks like the moon up there some days. There's craters, there's holes, and on rainy days, the bears are caked in mud. And most visitors would come to that exhibit and they'll say, oh, poor bear, not taken care of. He's dirty. Right? I mean, trust me, I've heard it all. What we've got to change is our attitude towards animals. We've anthropomorphized everything, thinking it has a human concept, a human aspect to it of feelings, but the bear enjoys that. Now me, not really into that. I don't mind getting dirty, but I'm not going to dig holes and wallow in it, But the bears enjoy that. And so what we saw was reproduction started going up. So I went to a meeting, an SSP meeting a few years ago at a large zoo, and they asked us, what's the success, why do you guys have such a high success rate with these sloth bears? What are you doing? I said, listen, you're going to tear out that exhibit. We're going to put them on dirt. The answer was, no. Can't do that, our visitors will have a fit. See, and that's the problem that you encounter in society right now, and we wonder why animals can't get removed off the endangered species list. It's our fault. It's the zoo's fault. I'm not saying it's yours, you don't work in a zoo. It's the zoo's fault for not educating folks and helping them to understand there's a reason that the animals are doing that behavior. There's a reason that exhibit's built that way. Not just because somebody was lazy. Inside the monkey exhibit, sometimes visitors will see grass that's maybe 2 feet tall. And some of them will leave the gift shop like, oh, I wish somebody go in there and weed eat that exhibit. No, I don't weed eat it for a reason. See, nothing's neatly manicured in the Amazon. Right? I've been through the Amazon. Trust me, nothing is manicured, right? But the monkeys are picking through that. If you call that down and you've got 2-inch grass, how hard is it to find a grape? It's not very hard. It's not very stimulating for them. So there's a reason for things. Japanese snow macaques, African lions, Hamadryas baboons, the Brazilians. Those are all different animals that the zoo has had tremendous success for. Breeding across the country. Those are all animals that we have on loan across different places. And we've got future plans for southern white rhinos. How many of you are familiar with the white rhino that just died earlier this year? You guys read about that? Yeah, the northern white rhino. Creation Kingdom Zoo is making a difference. And we made a promise when we opened the zoo that my wife and I, that if we couldn't make a difference, we weren't going to do it. It's not worth doing. Listen, life's too short to waste your time doing something that you're not making a difference for. Too many people chase a dollar their whole life. I've been guilty of that. As you get out of high school, I didn't have a whole lot of money growing up. I was like, oh, I got to do something, make some money, right? And so you chase a dollar. But I found out real quick that's not where I was happy. Where I was happy was when I was 5 years old, I made a book out of pictures cut out of Nat Geographic that was called Mark's Zoo. After I finished graduate school, I took a look at that book after I had a job for a little while, and I realized, that's where my first love was. That's where I need to be. So the most ambitious project that the zoo is about to undertake is we're working on this summer. I'll talk to you guys about that in just a minute. But our plan is not an inheritance from our parents, but on loan for our children. That spoke loudly to me. I've got a 6-year-old. I started with children late in life, which is a good thing for me. I was traveling the world and acting an idiot for a lot of years and didn't need a child. But I settled down. I got a 6-year-old now, and I want my daughter to see African elephants, not only in zoos. I want her to see them in the wild. Whether she gets to go to Africa or not, I want her to have that option for white rhinos, for tigers. Because for some animals, their only hope of survival is captive management programs. And I hear people say all the time, and you'll see people with little signs shouting outside zoos, turn them loose, they all belong in the wild. Listen, that's a pipe dream. Wild is disappearing very quickly, and the reality is in the wild, animals get eaten, they're poached, they're dying of starvation, they get disease. Listen, captivity is not so bad. It's pretty good for them. And the reality is we can't change humans. We can't curb our appetite or our greed. We're cutting forests down at an alarming rate. So until you can control people, captive management is the only hope of survival for some of these animals. These are kind of disturbing pictures, maybe for some of you guys. These are white rhinos. These are, this is mom over here on the, would be your right too, on the right, taking their horn off, all right? They're poached for their horns. They use that in different types of traditional medicines across the world. Nothing proven. They don't really have any benefit, but it's tough to change tradition over the last 200-300 years, right? So they're cutting the rhino horns off. Those are two parents that were killed there on the reserve, actually. The reserves are not safe either, if you know much about Africa. They got guards guarding these areas across Africa to make sure that the rhinos don't disappear, and it doesn't turn out real well all the time. No mother wants her child orphaned, right? Doesn't matter whether you're an animal or a human. What our conservation research and endangered wildlife wants to do is provide some long-term care for conservation to help these southern white rhinos. See, the last northern white rhino male died earlier this year. There's 2 captive females right now that are aging as well. But the reality is the white rhino is going to disappear. Your northern white rhino is going to be gone. There's about 20,000 southern white rhinos across the world, and those guys are disappearing at a rate of about 1,000 a year. Disappearing very quickly. And there's nothing you can do. Because here's the reality. In a lot of these countries, they don't have a whole lot of money. The average person just doesn't make much money. And so, if you don't make a whole lot of money, let's not all be high and mighty here and act like we would do this. If your family doesn't have a whole lot of money and your children are starving, and there's a white rhino in your backyard, you can get $50,000 for his horn, you gonna let your kids die? I don't answer that. None of us would. Right? So we can't blame people for killing them. It's a problem that is much larger than greed sometimes. Absolutely. On the other end, that horn's going to somebody greedy, but locally there, those folks are just starving. They're trying to survive, right? So there's a unique opportunity that we've had here at the zoo to acquire a couple babies. 2 of those moms, one of them was pictured in one of those pictures, and the other one was butchered as well last winter. But they got a couple of babies, 2 little female white rhinos, about this big. They're great. I got a friend that works at the reserve there who I've done some work with just over the years, but we're trying to bring those baby white rhinos here. Because here's what happens in the reserve. In the reserve, they're going to raise these white rhinos up. They've got them on bottles there. They're going to raise them up, and then they're going to turn them back loose on the reserve there. But the reality is you're turning them back loose for great possibility of slaughter. So we don't want that to happen. So the goal at the zoo is we want to bring those 2 babies here. I've got a colleague in Florida that's got a male white rhino that we'll bring up if we can get these 2 females here. And we want to bring them here. We've got a section of the zoo that has not had any construction done to it just to bring up these white rhinos if we can make it work out. But I believe if we can bring these girls here, right, we're going to save at least 2 of these. And I know with our staff there that we can reproduce these babies. So once they get old enough, we'll reproduce those, and hopefully that 20,000 number won't decline. If the zoos can all work together across the country, we can make a big difference for the white rhino. That's a huge animal to lose and never see again. You know, you and I were talking about the mastodon, the skeleton that they're putting together at the Great Fossil Center. We don't want to, in 25 years, be putting together fossils of rhinos because we don't have any left to look at. They typically reproduce in ratios of 1.2. Interestingly enough, this is one of those animals, again, just because you got a pair doesn't mean you're going to have babies. All right, they only reproduce with 1 male and 2 females as a general rule of thumb. So the southern white rhinos are going to go extinct in the next 15 to 20 years if things continue.
Why are you calling white that and black?
I'll tell you the interesting thing. White, you have 2 types of white rhinos and black rhinos. White actually was a misnomer. White came from the word wide because they have a wide mouth. Your white rhinos have a lip that's very, very wide, where your black rhinos have a very sharper lip. Now your black rhinos are a lot darker in color, but they're both kind of a blackish gray. But it actually is a misnomer. They're called white rhinos and always have been, but the original word came from an African word meaning wide mouth. And some European didn't figure that out and called it white mouth. This is an expensive project for the zoo. A couple $100,000 is what it's going to take for us to bring those over from Africa to the United States. But it does a couple things. It does brings a new set of genes into the U.S. for the U.S. population here. We got lots of white rhinos. I say lots. We've got a few white rhinos scattered across the country. but the gene pool's getting a little crowded, right? Because we haven't brought in new imports. So this will bring in a new set of genes into the United States. So once these guys have babies and we can place those on loan to other zoos, it will increase the gene pool for those guys. Our barn and exhibit's about $100,000 is what the zoo has. We've secured that part of the project. We're just we're going to work on probably a couple fundraisers this year. Somebody asked me the other day, what'd that 200 grand go for? Is he making some dude in Africa rich? No. No, 200,000. A lot of that pays for the patrol units to work the area to try and keep those guys safe. And it's not you're not just hiring 2 guys. I mean, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of kilometers. These guys have got to patrol. So it's a whole unit that takes care of this area the best they can. They don't always get it right. These poachers are smart. Poachers got helicopters, night vision goggles. They got a lot of money they're bringing in to get these guys. So it's tough to catch them. By the time the rangers usually hear the shot or discover a body, it is way too late. So that money goes to pay for ranger protection, equipment, supplies, veterinary service. There's a lot of work goes on, and these people they don't make much money. They love what they do. It's not like there's a lot of organizations out there, wildlife organizations that we can donate money to that. And I tell people this everywhere, and I speak at a lot of places, from groups much smaller than this to entire auditoriums full. Watch where your money goes. Because a lot of money that you're sending to a lot of different organizations is going to pay salaries of a lot of staff. And that's not, listen, if you don't pay somebody a salary, just pick somebody to pay their salary. If you want to pick an organization that you're going to send your money to that's really going to take that money and use it for what you intend for it to be used for. These guys use a lot of veterinary supplies and stuff here. So my question here at the end is, are you a talker or a walker? I found again that Americans are very good at talking and not walking. And every crowd I talk to, listen, my job in coming today is not to highlight the zoo. My job is to try and stimulate a spark in somebody in this room to make a difference. So you got to decide whether you're a talker or whether you're a walker. Decide, are you involved or committed? This morning, I had bacon and eggs for breakfast. Right? The chicken was involved in my breakfast. The pig was committed. So you guys have to decide. Each of us have to decide at some point in their life, are we just involved or are we committed to something? And I want folks to be committed to being good stewards of this planet. Although I question it sometimes at the zoo, we are the higher intelligence species here. You can't ask a gorilla to enact laws to make sure that they're safe. You can't ask another type of animal to do those things. It's up to people. So we have to make that difference and we have to make that decision. Otherwise, the whole ecosystem kind of falls apart. We say, well, what difference does that butterfly make, or that insect, or that elephant, or that wolf? What difference does it make if it's just gone? Listen, some differences we know right off the bat. Some of them it's going to take us years to find out. But take, for instance, the rainforest. 119 drugs, pharmaceutical drugs, are derived from plants that come out of the rainforest. It does make a difference to you. You think about that the next time you got to go to CVS to pick up a prescription. It makes a difference. That wolf makes a difference in the migratory routes of the elk that are moving through. See, in Yellowstone, they found out when they removed the wolves from some of those areas, the elk overpopulated. Now their migration routes weren't focused in certain areas. They were tearing down the creek banks everywhere because they're crossing the rivers at different places. Tearing down the river banks, it's destroying the habitat for the fish. See, it all trickles down. Our ecosystem is very fragile. So removing a rhino from the ecosystem makes a difference. Removing that butterfly from the system makes a difference. So think about that. I want you guys to really work hard at making a difference for the planet that we live in. Everybody wants to save the planet, but when you go and look, less than 2% of people actually do it. So that tells me, as a rule, we're walkers, we're talkers, not walkers. Thank you guys very much for your time this morning. I hope if you have an opportunity to come out, see me at the zoo. I am there 7 days a week. Anybody got any questions for me? All right, I'll open it up for questions now.
How big is your staff?
My staff. In the summertime, we're at about 11, sometimes 13. We use a lot of interns. In zoos, it's a tough field for folks who want a job, but it's a great field for zoos because it's flooded. Folks that come and work in a zoo, they usually work into their 70s. They just transfer departments where it's less physical for them. So openings are tough. So a lot of these guys are interning for anywhere from 5 to 7 years. So we usually have 4 or 5 interns throughout the summer that are, most of them are biology, zoology students, some of them vet students working through. And then year-round, we'll usually keep a staff of 4 to 5.
What are your hours?
Monday through Saturday, 10 to 5, and then Sundays are 1 to 5, from 7 days a week, all the way through November 30th.
How do you transport your animals when you loan them to other zoos?
We have a custom trailer that we can transport stuff in. A lot of zoos do it different ways. Some zoos contract a company. I've got some friends that drive semis for a living for, they're just independent contractors that have hauled tigers before. We just prefer to haul our own. And when it comes to big animals like giraffes, we'll move them as babies. That's the easiest way to do it. But I've found that, this is just me personally, but it's my investment. I don't trust a whole lot of people to haul it. So we do most of our moving. Yes, sir?
The weather in Snowflake is not exactly Africa or South America, so how does the weather or climate affect the animals?
Everything has heated indoor enclosures. So in the wintertime, they can go in or out. They have the choice. Animals are smart enough to go into a warm area. Now, if it's going to drop down into the teens at night, we will lock primates in. Some of the host-type giraffes are locked in always at night, even in the summer. But the primates get locked in mainly because they're, as intelligent as they are, they're not smart enough not to get in a fight, and then little lemur over here decides he wants to pout because mama scolded him, and I'm going to sit outside for the next 20 minutes, and it's 10 degrees outside. So we'll lock those primates in. It doesn't have an effect on breeding so much with anything except mainly tropical birds, like our toucans and things like that. We will keep, we have animals on and off exhibit. We have what's called the farm. So the farm is where either breeding animals are that won't breed when they're on public display, or to rotate them off. So right now we just had some black and white rough lemur babies born, and we moved them off exhibit to be born so that mom wasn't stressed and there wasn't an issue with losing babies. So we just pulled another pair on exhibit. So visitors never really know which 2 or 3 or what group it is. But with our toucans and things like that, because of their breeding cycle, I've got a female kill-bill toucan on a nest right now. So we've had to move non-breeding toucans out on exhibit right now, just because if you're moving them back and forth, you'll miss that opportunity for them to breed. But everything has heated indoor quarters, minus like your tigers. A lot of folks think tigers, India, 140 degrees, which is true, but tigers extend into the Himalayas, which is deep snow too. So they, our original tiger exhibit had heated radiant floor heat inside, and I found that the cats were sleeping out in the snow all the time. So the new exhibit didn't get that heated floor. But some of the new exhibits, the newer exhibits, like your bear den, your giraffe enclosure, your gibbons, have radiant floor heat, which I found is great. Because the floor's obviously 120 degrees and the heat rises. Some of the older exhibits have gas or electric heat. But about 90, I'm going to say 95% of the zoo's heated. Yes, sir?
What about the food? How expensive, and do you grow some of it there on the farm?
We had discussed growing some food there, which would be great. We go through 1,000 pounds of meat a week for the carnivores. Right now I'm contracted through Walmart. We buy Purdue chicken, same chicken you guys go and buy, the cats get. They get a little vitamin and mineral that's sprinkled on it though. It's whole bone chicken on it. But we had looked at growing our own chickens, which we do grow some chickens for the eggs and for feeders for falcons and things. But the reality is the number of chickens that it would require for us to breed and pluck, and it was just, we had to have a staff just to do that. So right now we're still contracted. We'll buy the chickens from Walmart. Fruit produce, we go through about 8,000 pounds a month. We are contracted through a local guy here in Kingsport who sells to some of the grocery stores here. But we try to buy local as much as we can. Obviously, Purdue chicken's not local. But as often as we can buy local, I believe in supporting a local economy. So we buy as much stuff as we can. Grains all come from the different feed stores here. And then a lot of our foods, we have, I think there's 38 different specialty foods at the zoo. We ship some of it in, it comes in on pallets. Primates have to have a particular type of biscuit and that sort of thing. So we do raise our own crickets, which is It's a little bit easy. We go through about 1,000 crickets a week. But mice, we buy mice also. We go through, I think it's 260 mice a month. So.
How about roadkill?
We never use roadkill. Nothing wrong with roadkill. I know a lot of zoos that do it. My personal thought on roadkill was that there's two things. Number one, roadkill's got to be put in a freezer for 2 weeks before you can feed it, just to make sure that it doesn't have any parasites still alive in it. But my problem with roadkill was it's a personal issue, and I decided a long time ago that I would just, that was one thing I wasn't going to give on. And I believe if you're in captivity, you deserve better than roadkill. And that's just me, you know what I'm saying? I mean, nothing wrong with it. Animals eat carrion in the wild, but for the health benefits, to make sure that our animals stay healthy and all that, we just, I've never fed roadkill, because you don't really know what happened to it, you know, whether it was sick when it got run over or not. So that's a hang-up I have, and it costs me a little bit of money every month, but I believe cats and bears and lions appreciate it. Yes, ma'am?
This sounds like a tremendous expense. Do you get all your funds just from people coming in, or?
All the funding from the zoo comes from the gate.
Really?
Yeah, our admission rates, we kept admissions at $10 a head the plan is long-term to keep it $10 a head. So it's not a money, I knew when I got into this was not a money maker. This was a money eater.
Right.
But I tell my keepers and these kids that are coming up and want to work in zoos, you know, you don't have to make a lot of money if you don't have a lot of bills. And so me personally, I don't have hardly any bills. The zoo is relatively self-sufficient in that respect. You know, through the winter months, we do a lot of nativities. If any of you guys were at Church Circle for the nativity this past winter, those were our camels at the nativity. So we do nativities all up and down the East Coast. That makes a little extra money in the month of December. But it's a joke with all my Florida friends who, in Florida, you know, they're open year-round. The zoos down there are. We get to close here for about 4 months, so we save all year long to make it through those 4 months. But part of the deal with opening with restructuring that nonprofit was we were going to look at some grant funding and that sort of thing, especially for certain projects that we wanted to work with. You know, I mean, for example, the rhino deal, a couple $100,000 for those guys is it's a huge undertaking that the zoo. We could build the barn, we got the $100,000 all for that put together, but it's a matter of putting together the rest of it. So now we're self-funded. I stayed away from grants for years, and honestly I don't know a whole lot about grants now. I just know when Uncle Sam gives you something, he usually has his hand back out like this, and so I'm leery of that.
Yes, sir.
Do you receive gifts through your 501c in the zoo crew?
We have not yet. But that just launched again. They just kind of put all that together in January, and we're looking for somebody to spearhead kind of the fundraising aspect of that, so they can take donations, they can take things like that. I'm not the person for that. I couldn't sell squat, and I certainly couldn't ask somebody for donations. I don't know how all that works. I'm an animal guy. I raise animals and know how to raise them, but I am not, and I'm a great business guy. But I'm not a fundraiser, so we're looking for a person to spearhead that project right now. And of course, you know, up until then, if somebody came up and said they had some money for that organization, and they could put it in that account, there's an account set up for it.
I have a donations jar. A donations jar, do you have that?
There's a donations jar at the front of the zoo. It's interesting. Those don't work well. They don't. It's funny. People look at them and they go on, but. We do have a donations jar at the front. It's kind of a non-specific, you know, you can just throw a buck in there if you want, and it all goes to not a particular project. But I've looked at those and I've talked with some friends at some major metropolitan zoos, and they really don't work for them either. The difference is San Diego had this thing where they had parking meters. Really cool, and they look great, and it's conservation hand, you know, and it's I think it says change for change is what it was. And so you can put your quarter in there, you know, for change. Man, and they made a tremendous amount of money off of it. But in respect for the number of people that they see annually, it was nothing, you know. They only made a whole lot of money off of it because they had a whole lot of visitors. You know, when you get too many visitors coming through, if they put a penny in there, they've made a lot of money. So it just historically hasn't worked out well.
You may not want to answer this, but does your wife have a background in the same
sort of thing as you?
She's got a biology degree, yeah. Yeah, she actually has an unrelated master's degree, but she's got a background too. She's the behind the scenes of the zoo. If there are babies inside the zoo who mamas aren't taking care of them, I'll tell you, there's not a better person on the planet. Lemurs, one year we had some baby lemurs born. They can't suck off a bottle. They actually lick off the end of a dropper. Otherwise, they'll aspirate every 2 hours for 6 weeks around the clock. So she's got a gift that I don't have. I get sleepy. But she's the behind the scenes. You rarely see my wife around. She does not like to be in front of crowds on television or anything else. So, but she is a huge force behind lots of babies at the zoo. Yes, sir.
How many animals do you have on average at any one time?
At the zoo right now, I think there's around 300 on exhibit. Between what's off exhibit and loaned out to other facilities, we're at probably 1,100. Yes, sir.
When's a good time to visit? We don't have bus loads of kids over.
Field trip season ended, I think, last week.
Quiet times, I think.
Yeah, you know, I'll tell you, there's a couple of events that go on through the year, especially that are neat, is through the summer, we have what's called Safari Nights, where the zoo opens back up from 8 to 10 at night. And it's all under lights, and the keepers are giving carnivore talks and feedings and stuff. All the exhibits are open. They can't feed animals at night. But it's a neat time to come to. Those dates are always announced on our Facebook page. But any time of day, folks will ask sometimes when's a good time when the animals are active. Because it's interactive, they associate visitors with good things, and so they're always active throughout the day. Now, I can guarantee you the cats, hyenas, things like that are going to be belly up. Just they sleep all day, you know. And the cats are only going to get up about an hour over the course of the entire night. But everybody else is pretty active throughout the day. Yes, ma'am?
Do you have any handouts, or are you have
I do. I've got some brochures
website?
up here.
Okay.
Yeah, I got some brochures and some business cards up here. I'll open that up and you can grab one of those if you guys want one. Yes, ma'am?
Have you ever had any animals escape?
I have. I had some tortoises get loose about 11 years ago. Let me tell you, it's funny, but it would be easier to catch a tiger than a tortoise. 26 acres, the tortoise was just roaming around. And, you know, I mean, he's 100 pounds, but I couldn't find him. I couldn't find him. And the funny thing was, he came walking back up the walkway inside the barn, like he was just coming home after being a prodigal child, you know? And just walked back up. I said, God, get him before he takes off again. But I did have some tortoises loose, and I had some porcupines one year. We had a cave-in at the zoo, so I had 10 porcupines running around, and those are always interesting to round up. You know, when we're grabbing porcupines to sex them or to move them from place to place. It's always very interesting. A lot of things you can grab. You can man up if you want to, but there's no manning up with a porcupine. Nothing to get a hold of. So no, our guidelines. I have what's called the federal guidelines through U.S. Fish and Wildlife and USDA that all zoos are the same. We're licensed. Matter of fact, my inspector and Knoxville's inspector is the same person, but we all have the same guidelines there. And then I have Marc Bradley's guidelines. I don't want to wake up one morning. I live at the zoo. So I don't want to wake up with a leopard on my front porch. So my guidelines exceed the Fed's guidelines for those recommendations. And knock on wood, we've never had an issue at the zoo. Anybody else? Thank you very much. I appreciate you guys.
Thank you. Well, I thank everybody for being here, and Mark said something about getting involved. I think the next time we're at his zoo or any zoo, we will be involved because of just what we know goes on behind the scenes that we didn't before. And I thank you very much. Are there other announcements? Okay, thanks everybody.
Thank you.